Hello, we're John and Elizabeth. We're on board Corrick. We're sailing in the Kyles of Bute, and
if you don't like the wind direction
or speed,
wait 5 minutes.
And it'll change. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, we got into the inner Clyde. We spent a couple of days at Lamlash, actually adjusting to the fact that we didn't have a time pressure.
And also being in Scotland.
Yeah. Went for a bit of a sail up the easternmost part. Went to Loch because we had to do some stuff there. And it turns out that's the biggest chandlery we could find.
And we came out to, where was it?
Colin.
There is some hotel moorings which we picked up.
Yeah.
Very short. The Colin Hotel is excellent.
Yes. Very good food. And we're heading down towards Tighnabruich.
We tried out our anchor chain.
Tried out our anchor, a very lovely anchorage.
New anchor chain.
New anchor chain. Expensive anchor chain. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
Well, we're making our way into Brodick on the island of Arran on foot. We had a good time in Troon. We were able to meet up with family, and that was very lovely. We also sorted out a couple of fuel issues. It's got diesel and got gas, which was great. But while we were in Troon, people said that we might have missed a trick by not spending a little bit more time on Arran, and therefore wind was in the right direction for us to have a breezy little punch back across that 15-mile stretch. Picked up a mooring buoy in Lamlash. I'm not quite ready to spend hours away from the boat on anchor yet, but we can talk about that later as well. And Arran is just lovely. It is. I'm going to back up very slightly because...
Oh, look over there.
Yeah, so if you just look over my shoulder, we've got the rolling hills, then the sea, and then in the background, really rather magnificent looking mountains. I'm just going to go that way a bit, clouds coming over it. But yeah, very glad
that we came back.
Very glad that we came back, and we were just arriving in Brodick, as I say. Time for some lunch.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Look forward to that, yeah. Well, that was Lamlash. It's a busy old place. Brodick was nothing like as busy, and I think we know why. When we saw the boats around there, they were slopping around a bit.
They were quite exposed. But it was a lovely evening.
Yeah. So we're gonna leave here. We're gonna go now. We're gonna leave under sail alone. So we're gonna put the main up, put one reef in, head north. The weather forecast is north or northwesterly, but we've just seen a boat go out and we saw him get onto a heading of about 020, which is about what we need to get up to Great Cumbrae. So if the wind is just a little bit west of north, we're good. So we'll see how we go. I'll talk a little bit about how we secure to and release from buoys in a minute. But it is interesting the degree to which you see different people doing different things. Our routine for securing to a buoy, particularly one without a picking up line, is to take one of our warps and take it from one of our cleats straight through the buoy, shackle, and then back onto the boat, and we get that under control and sorted out. The next thing we do is we bring the buoy underfoot and we put a second line out here, the darker line, and we loop that round the shackle on the buoy, so that it holds on nice and tight and there is no chafe. This is very much as we were advised to do in St Mary's and has worked really, really well. This is what it looks like in real life in Lamlash. We've got our line with the loop on it through the centre fair lead. We've then got the second line rigged, but no weight in it, rigged as a slip to either the cleats on either side. That lets us get away nice and easily, and we got away from Lamlash very nicely. We were able to do just off the wind a really very fast passage in probably Steady 15, 17, 18 knots of breeze. Little bit chilly, but all fine. And as we approached the entrance to the inner Clyde, and we're just between the very bottom of the Isle of Bute here, just about to come up to Kilchatton Bay with Little Cumbrae out of sight on the starboard side. Nice to see the whole pile of ferries and whatnot, and it was starting to get a little bit more busy in terms of boats, so 2 or 3 yachts going by, and all very pleasant indeed. And we had a right old blast all the way from Lamlash all the way up past Rothsay, past Guruk, up towards the Holy Loch. Holy Island of Holy Loch was quite nice, and we then went alongside in Sandbanks for a quiet evening with a little bit of defect rectification. One of the things we anticipated we'd have to do while we were away on our trip was to at least service, if not deal with a defect with the heads. It's only ever happened to me once before, and that was on a trip across the Bay of Biscay. Fortunately, it wasn't me that blocked it, so somebody else had to unblock it, and that was fine. This time, what we noticed was a bit of backfilling on the heads a couple of days ago, and I thought that means the joker valve's on its way out, and it's now difficult to pump it completely out. So one of the things James and I discussed before we left was doing this, and his suggestion, which I now really liking, is that it would be a good idea to take a spare pump mechanism and then just completely swap the pump mechanism out, and then buy the service kit and do the service on the pump mechanism whilst it's removed. That means that it should be just a 15 or 20 minute job to change over the pump. You could do it at sea, although thankfully we're alongside, but it means you don't have that loss of heads facility whilst you're waiting to do the service. So all of this stuff is very well covered online. If you're in the situation where you've got one of these, I suggest you look at them first before we've had a couple of days of very poor, if not no, internet connectivity, but it looks fairly straightforward. Let's see how I get on. The tools themselves, got a pair of gloves, screwdriver, base valve, and a replacement unit. I'm probably not going to fit this elbow. I'll probably use the joker valve from here, but leave that on. It's just another pipe that I don't have to connect and reconnect. The only other thing that I've got is, you can see it just down there, is a bucket to try and keep as much mess out as we can, because it is gently filling. Sorry about that. Well, I got the pump off and I had a look at the joker valve and I cleaned it up a little bit. I'm just going to show you this now. What you can see through that's an indication that has had its chips. It's not doing everything that it should do. You can maybe just see a little bit of light through it and it's fine, but it should be a bit more like yeah. So I went and bought a new one, but I also got there's another valve at the bottom, which is that one, and you can see a little bit more of the build-up of calcium on there. So I've got a new one of those, so I will clean up the pump. I had a look at the pump handle seals, they all seem fine, so I only bought the 2 parts of the service kit, and we'll put that together and we'll package it all up such that if we do have a problem with the heads pump again, we should be able to just whiz one out, whiz one back in. Ideal. When we fitted the boat out, there were a few questions of scaling things that I sort of dodged for a little while, mostly because I just wanted to get going with the boat and see how things worked before I then refined that. So things like ropes, fenders, I basically said, let's just have what you would get if you bought one new, and we've upped the number of fenders, we've upped the number of ropes, we've put snubbers in, those sorts of things. But another one of those conversations, and a slightly more in-depth one, was about anchors, and it comes back to what do you want to do with the boat. So we talked about types of anchors and sizes of anchors and lengths of chain, and we definitely underdid it. So we put a 20 kilogram CQR and a 25 kilogram CQR, 10 meters of chain for both, and a bit of rope. And that was very much based on the idea that certainly in the Solent we were expecting to use the lighter anchor, throw it over, one night only, reasonably shallow water, and that has worked okay, but we're now in the much deeper waters of the Clyde, and I want to use the heavier anchor, and I want to use a bit more chain. So we arranged for a shipment of chain, and we're gonna connect it all up this morning before we head a little bit further west. So this is us upgrading our ground tackle. A few days earlier we had ordered some additional chain, and that took some time to arrive, but we got a telephone call when we were in Sandbanks to say that it had arrived and that it was in Largs. And so we got in there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wandered up to the chandlery and picked up an additional 30 meters of chain and dragged that all down to the boat. Elizabeth was then a little bit busy ashore, sorting things out, because one of the things that Largs has was a very nice set of facilities and indeed laundry. So in the interim, what I did was I got our 25-pound anchor out of its stowage, which was in the forepeak. I don't know if you can see it terribly well, but I've got a handy billy attached to the spinnaker up hole, and that allows me to gently pull the anchor straight out the hatch. And it's easy enough to lift single-handed, but if you use the handy billy, then the handy billy has all the weight, and then you can use a hand for keeping everything away from sharp edges, and indeed trying to avoid getting your own fingers caught in it. So I got the anchor suspended up here, and then I was able to, nicely under control, just lower it down into position. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do was I needed to get the old anchor out, and that's the old anchor in there, and you can see how little space it takes up with the tiny amount of chain that we had there. But we got that then out of the anchor locker itself, and had a go at putting the new anchor in it, because what I wanted to do is just see what exactly the best way for that anchor to go in was. And it basically, the back edge of the plough, in at the broad end. It's completely obvious how it goes in, but it drops in there nicely, and there is just enough room for the stock to get itself in into the locker. So that works really well. So now that I was confident that it was all going to fit together very nicely, the next thing I wanted to do was to get everything onto the jetty and sort it all out. One of the things I wanted to do was just check the bitter end. So this is the line that actually connects the anchor to the boat. So I had a good inspection of that. And there's a D-shackle inside the anchor locker, and the rope ties onto that with a bowline. And I've taken a cable tie through the actual rope as well, just to make sure that the tail of the bowline doesn't come undone. But that is likely to be fairly seriously buried now that we have quite a good deal more chain inside the locker. One of the things you get when you buy this chain is you get the obligatory health warning that says you should really check it, and if you haven't checked it, it could lead to the loss of your vessel. So we did that, and what we did was ranged the entire cable along the jetty to do a couple of things. Just inspect the cable itself, also make sure it was actually the right length, and to mark it up. And to mark it up, a lot of people use paint, but I don't. What I've used is some cable ties, one for 10 meters, two for 20 meters, etc. And I leave the tails on the cable ties, because I think if you cut them, there is a chance that you don't spot them, and therefore you could end up just gently cutting yourselves. Thing about the cable ties is they're terribly easy to replace, whereas repainting things can be a bit of a pain in the neck. Having done all of the preparation, we then took the whole of the anchor back onto the boat, so fed it all in, put a little line on it so that we could handle it, and Elizabeth practiced dropping it into the locker itself, which worked really well. We very much enjoyed our visit to Troon, nice little seaside town, and having got the anchor sorted out, a bit of a weight off our minds, so we set off.
How relaxed are you feeling?
Very relaxed. Could do with the sun coming out, but it's good.
The previous day's sail down to Troon had been reasonably breezy, but by the next day a high had started to come in, and we went past Loch Striven. It had started to die, and we ended up motoring the last little bit towards Collintrave, but we picked up a mooring buoy that belonged to a local hotel, got ashore and had a very lovely supper in the hotel itself, and then a quiet start for our trip to Tighnabruich. Extremely short distances involved and very light airs this time, so we just waited for the tide to be favourable, and although in the Kyles the tide is relatively light, it was springs, and at the gap at Burnt Island, the guidebook or the pilot book suggests that it can be up to 2 or 3 knots, maybe a tiny bit more than that, but it was very light airs, and beautiful scenery, and the boat handled just a little bit like a big dinghy in these conditions. So Elizabeth and I tacked our way gently up towards Burnt Island, through the gap, and then into Loch Ridden, and you can see the buoyed passage just ahead of us there as we put this tack in. It was touch and go getting through, but we had the engine very much in the warmed up state, shall we say, just in case we needed it, which is very much as per the advice there as well. But it was a very pleasant sail. But what we are absolutely discovering in this little stretch of water is that the wind can come from any direction and change 40, 60 degrees in a heartbeat. But we weren't travelling very far. You can see from the scale down at the bottom, just a few miles. And we made our way through, and then we sort of headed up into Loch Ridden, and went for a sail up and down that loch, which was particularly pleasant. What we then did was we were going to go and find ourselves a little bit of an anchorage, and there is a particularly well-known anchorage at Cala, which is between Collintrave and Tighnabruich. So I went up onto the bow and got that all sorted, and we blasted our way. The wind had come up quite nicely at this point, and blasted our way south, and it was warm, it was dry, it was a little bit overcast, but it was really very pleasant sailing conditions indeed. We had a fabulous lunch at anchor in this very beautiful spot, and just at the point that we were thinking about getting up and going, we heard a ship ask small yachts to keep out of their way. And it was a real pleasure that as we looked out through the gap, we could see the paddle steamer Waverley, which had just come through the gap that we'd just sailed through, blasting her way down towards Tighnabruich. Got along to Tighnabruich, picked up a friend's mooring buoy just off, and spent the evening with him. Next morning we were up, and again it had gone very light. This is us exiting down towards the south of the West Kyle, all very quiet indeed. So Elizabeth, how would you describe the sea state here?
Completely smooth.
Smooth or slight, I would agree. Yeah. It's all a bit overcast, but it's quite warm.
Are you kidding me?
You don't think it's warm? Yeah, but
visibility's not great.
Visibility isn't great, but we're pottering our way up towards Tarbet at the grand speed of just under 2 knots.